An unexpected betrayal, a plot from his own blood relatives. When the truth is revealed, Jack no longer has the strength to stand firm. So who is really behind it all? And what happened during the chase that made the entire police force have to use all their strength? Please follow along. When they arrived, Uncle Tien's house was closed. The curtains were drawn low. Tien knocked hard on the wooden door. "I know everything, Uncle. You can't escape." There was no response from inside. But Tien clearly heard the sound of hurried footsteps retreating inside, as if someone was looking for a way to escape. Tien did not hesitate. She immediately took out her phone and called the local police. Her voice was firm, but her hands were still shaking from tension. "I am a relative of the victim in the case of Jack being harmed. I am in front of the main suspect's house, Mr. Tien. I have evidence that he is directly involved in the incident and is showing signs of fleeing." Less than 5 minutes later, a local police car with its siren roared in. Tien took a few steps back, her eyes fixed on the half-closed door. At that moment, a figure rushed out from the back door, ran across the small yard, intending to climb onto the parked motorbike. But it was too late. 2 police officers quickly rushed in, restraining Mr. Tien on the spot. When he was handcuffed, Mr. Tien's face was no longer calm and friendly like before. His face was pale. His panicked eyes swept over Tien, but he did not say a word. Tien stood still, looking straight at him. His eyes were no longer afraid, but determined and painful. A police officer walked towards her. "Thank you for reporting the news in time. We will conduct a search and extract documents at the suspect's house. You can come to the headquarters later to provide a statement and submit video evidence." Tien nodded. At that moment, she could only think of one thing. Jack had to know the truth. He needed to know who had almost killed him, and who had always silently stood by him, even when the whole world had turned their backs. It started to rain when Tien left the scene, the wind blowing through the small alley as if carrying away the unfinished worries. On the way to the police station, she kept thinking about Jack, who was still resting at home, mentally recovering from the shock. She knew that he would have to face a cruel truth. The person he trusted the most, Uncle Tien, was the one who pushed him to the brink of death. At the police station, Tien submitted all the evidence: a copy of the land records with a shady signature, a video recording from the repair shop, and statements from people who saw Uncle Tien with Vu in the days leading up to the incident. The investigator nodded repeatedly, his face serious. "The things you provided are very valuable. We have coordinated with the district forces to track down Vu's traces. Now everything is clearer." When leaving the station, it was raining heavily. Tien stood by the porch of a coffee shop, her eyes looking into the distance. In her heart, a part of her was relieved, because the truth was gradually coming to light. But the other part was aching when she thought about the pain Jack would have to bear. Relatives betrayed, friends colluded to harm. Would he be strong enough to overcome it? She took out her phone, dialed Jack's mother's number, and briefly told her that the incident had taken a new turn. On the other end of the line, she was choked up and couldn't speak, only uttering one sentence: "Thank you. If it weren't for you, we would never have known the truth." Tien hung up the phone, sighed. It was late at night. She drove home. Jack still didn't know what had just happened. He was still lying there, silently fighting with his weak body and unhealed wounds. When he entered the room, his eyes opened slightly, meeting hers. "You're back?" Jack asked softly, his voice weak but warm. Tien nodded, walked over and held his hand. "Yes, I'm back, and brought the truth with me." Jack's eyes were a little skeptical, but Tien didn't say anything more. She knew that tomorrow morning, when his health was better, she would tell him everything. About Vu, about Uncle Tien, about the shadow of sin that had surrounded the farm for so many years. That night, she sat next to Jack until morning. Her hand still held his, as if she was transmitting to him all the calmness, all the faith that the nightmare was about to end, and justice was gradually being revealed under the sunlight. The next morning, pale yellow sunlight filtered through the glass window, shining on Jack's sleeping face. Tien was still sitting next to him, her eyes dark from staying up all night. When Jack stirred slightly, his eyes looked around hazily and stopped at her. "You haven't gone home to rest yet?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. Tien smiled awkwardly, squeezing his hand gently. "I don't feel safe leaving you alone. Besides, I have something to tell you this morning." Jack frowned, sitting up slowly. He looked deep into her eyes, sensing something was wrong. "What happened? About the farm? Or about the person who harmed you?" Tien was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. She took a deep breath, then gently recounted the whole story, from the clues she found to the confrontation with Uncle Tuan and his arrest by the police while trying to escape. When the name Vu was mentioned, her eyes darkened. As for Vu, he escaped before the police could arrest him. Now there's a nationwide arrest warrant. "I'm sorry, Jack, but it's the truth. Uncle Tuan is behind it all. They colluded to harm you, and perhaps even target the land." Jack was silent. For a long time, his face was bloodless. His eyes were wide open, empty, as if he had just lost a part of his soul. "It can't be," he whispered. "Uncle Tuan was the person my father trusted the most. The one who took care of the land papers for me, who supported me when my father died. And Vu, he was my cousin, who grew up with me. Why is that? Why did they treat me like that?" Tien held Jack's hand tighter, her eyes brimming with tears. "Because of greed, Jack. Because they thought you were gullible. Easy to deceive, but you're not alone. I'm here. I won't let anyone touch you again." Jack lowered his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. For the first time in his life, he let his tears fall, not because of physical pain, but because of his betrayed trust. But in those tears, there was still light, because by his side, there was still Tien, the girl who had gone through all the dangers to bring him back from the abyss of betrayal and pain. At the same time, Jack was sitting silently by the window, his heart heavy with shock. In another place, the hunt for Vu was entering an urgent phase. At the district police headquarters, a closed meeting was held among the investigators. Lieutenant Colonel Lam, who was directly in charge of the case, drew up a map of Vu's suspicious movements in the past few days. "This guy is cunning and knows how to hide himself. After committing the crime, he did not run straight out of the province but hid for a few days in a temporary camp in the border area. Then, thanks to an old acquaintance who worked as a freight transporter, he got on a truck and headed towards the Central Highlands." A young officer spoke up. "Report. The last location Vu appeared was at a motel in Buan Ho. Doc Lock." The motel owner confirmed that he used fake documents. Named Nguyen Van Duong, rented a room for only one night and then disappeared. Lieutenant Colonel Lam nodded, immediately signing a special wanted order. "Set up checkpoints at key traffic points. Coordinate with the police of the Central Highlands provinces. He is most likely trying to cross the border through the trails." Less than 24 hours later, a special reconnaissance team was sent to the southwestern border area, where there are many small-scale routes to Cambodia. There, they discovered a motorbike abandoned on the edge of the forest, next to which were clearly imprinted footprints on the wet ground. From this trace, the pursuit team split into two groups, chasing through the forest at night. The sudden rain in the forest made the road slippery, but no one faltered. After 3 hours of encirclement, near dawn, a scout discovered a figure moving near an abandoned wooden shack. "Stand still. Police here." Vu panicked and ran away. But not far. He stumbled in the slippery mud. His leg twisted, unable to stand up. Just a few seconds later, he was completely subdued, his face pale, his eyes panicked. He knew the game was over. At the time of his arrest, Vu's backpack contained a large amount of cash, fake documents, and a phone that still had undeleted messages with Uncle Tuan. The last message contained only a few words: "Get rid of him before it's too late." That afternoon, news of Vu's arrest was brought back to the district. Tien received the call in tears, while Jack just looked on silently. His eyes red. "It's over, bro. The one who harmed you now has to pay the price." Jack nodded slightly. He didn't say anything, but in his heart, he felt at peace for the first time after so many months of living in the dark.
Cùng lúc Jack đang ngồi lặng bên cửa sổ, lòng nặng trĩu bởi những cú sốc dồn dập, thì ở một nơi khác cuộc truy đuổi bắt cũng đang bước vào giai đoạn khẩn trương. Trụ sở công an huyện, một cuộc họp kín được tổ chức giữa các cán bộ điều tra trung tá Lâm, người trực tiếp chỉ đạo vụ án, vạch lên bảng hồ sơ hành trình di chuyển khả nghi của Vũ trong những ngày qua. Tên này danh ma và rất biết cách ẩn mình. Sau khi gây án, hắn không chạy thẳng ra khỏi tỉnh mà lẩn trốn vài ngày trong một lán trại tạm ở vùng giáp ranh. Sau đó nhờ một người quen cũng làm nghề chở hàng, hắn đã lên xe tải đi về hướng